Hi, Robin.
Hello,
Nice to
Helen.
see you again.
Nice
Um,
to see you with you.
this rendition that I'm doing tonight, I will not be singing. Well, maybe. But in conversation with Salwan at the beginning of this, and I did have a song, we got talking about, I also do creative writing, and we got talking about that. And he said, oh, I've got, as Salwan does, oh, I've got an idea. I've got an idea. So this is the culmination of Salwan's idea and Salwan's coaching and my writing. So here goes. Okay. Fly me to the moon. Maybe not literally. Ella's favorite song has always been Fly Me to the Moon, sung magnificently by Frank Sinatra. Unfortunately, her boyfriend Toby was forever trying to emulate that iconic artist's performance. So much so that every time they were together, he would persist in singing it, trying to improve upon his last effort. But to Ella's chagrin, all that seemed to happen was that it became a songworm in her head. Unrelenting, never ending, repeating. So much so that sometimes she felt like screaming, "Shut up, shut up." One day, after a particularly boring rendition, she let her mind drift, trying to find something in her thoughts that would drown out this song, which in actual fact she was coming to dislike intensely. She lay back on the couch and started daydreaming of all kinds of scenarios to take her mind off this musical invader. Predictably, she drifted off into one of those lovely afternoon snoozes, time stolen out of the day, not missed at the time, but on awakening makes you feel refreshed and content. That is, of course, if your brain doesn't embark on a journey of its own, taking you God knows where. On this particular day, in Ella's case, the mind was taking her on an elusive journey, inspired by the song title, Fly Me to the Moon. It had taken it literally, and now took her through this mesmerizing and futuristic, extraordinary journey through time and space, unlike anything that reality would resemble. This out-of-body experience started with her being chosen by NASA to be a special astronaut engaged in experiments on the moon. She was heading for an established settlement set up a decade ago to continue developing a colony on the moon so that people from Earth could transfer their families to make this viable, as the planet Earth's demise had accelerated at a rapid pace more recently. Because of mankind's continued denial of climate change and the oceans now awash with plastic, sea life was almost extinct. Life on land wasn't much better, with vast swathes of Earth no longer able to sustain food production, and millions were facing a life of starvation. The secret on the moon is that they had been more successful than on Earth in creating underground vertical farms. In tunnels going on for miles, they had installed multi-layer trays of greens containing salad leaves and vegetables being grown under a special light process that required no water, just some specially developed chemicals that proved safe for mankind. They were designed to be able to sustain the vast population from Earth that would eventually need to relocate to the moon. It would take quite a few more years of experimentation and production. They were also finding ways to clone and recreate meat substitutes to keep the diet balanced and healthy. It was mind-blowing, let alone the production of enough oxygen so that they could sustain life above ground. In her deep sleep, Ella's dream felt so real to her that when things started to fade away and she began to reconnect with reality, she was shaking from head to toe. She had broken out in a cold sweat, so the first thing she wanted to do was to get a shower and a fresh set of clothes. It was now dark, and on her way through the living room to her ensuite bathroom, She stopped for a moment and looked out of the window at the large moon in the night sky. She would never think of it the same way again, especially when Toby sang, "Fly me to the moon." She shuddered, headed for a shower, and hopefully back to her normal life. But in her head, she could still hear, "Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars." Will she ever? Calvin, that was a surprise for you. The end bit.
Did you say that the singing was a surprise to you as well? Or you
Well,
sort of warned
yes,
us you
sort
might
of.
break into song. Well, I'm very glad you did, because from a teaching point of view, it was fantastic. Because one of the things that I was going to point out. I mean, it's fairly obvious, but again, like the obviousness of the heartbeat and the blood going through the ears, we sometimes tend to block out these kinds of issues. What was extraordinary about having that, in other words, I actually felt this much less with Harry, because he was being a philosopher and you were being a creative writer and a poet. In a way, they're two quite different things. But the detailed rhythmic variety in freely uttered speech is absolutely mind-boggling. Now, this is a nightmare scenario, but I'll put it to you, and you'll see how absurd it is. But it's what an awful lot of the early ethnomusicologists used to try and do. Can you imagine what enormously complicated musical notational things you would have to do if we wanted to try and approximate to your verbal pacing in musical notation? It would be an absolute nightmare. It would take ages to try and sort it out. I mean, Western musical notation is very simplistic, and it just doesn't lay itself open to that sort of thing. So you've given us a wonderful example of the difference between rather straight-jacketed rhythmic aspects of Western singing. And of course, this became brilliant when, at the end, very, very rhythmically, and with people sort of bouncing around to your rhythms, which gave the plus side as well as the minus side of Western music being very simple rhythmically. When you lay the two side by side like that in the same voice as a climax to what you were doing, is absolutely brilliant. But it made that point even more strongly than if you hadn't done that singing. And the reaction of others was extremely interesting, because they gave a bodily reaction to the simple rhythms of sung music, whereas they've been all ears but without bouncing around to the rhythms of your spoken language beforehand. And again, there was a fantastic sense of progression through that. And I love the way that you got professionally, sincerely, but also seemingly totally naturally carried away into a stream of utterance when you were talking about Ella's dream. And the great excitement of actually being on the moon and describing all these seemingly plausible, slightly sci-fi things that she was getting up to in her dream. And I felt really, really sorry about her awakening. I was hurt, in a totally positive artistic sense, as she was when she came to. I wasn't quite aware until you told us that it had gone as far as making her wake up in a cold sweat. But I found that believable as well when it was told me. I love that. Actually, what you said at the beginning, perhaps because it hadn't already happened at that point, you missed out one vital element of the construction of this. You said it was Salwa's advice and your writing. Also, perhaps the most vital element of it tonight was going to be your performing, not just the fact that you've written it. Yes, so don't neglect the glories of the moment. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, because when we were doing, Salwan and I were doing this together, and I kind of grasped his first thing to me was, I want you to read this as if you were singing it. And I said, what on earth do you mean by that? So he read some things out and we developed it from that. But the ultimate thing and great thing that happened for me with doing the whole thing and reading it out was I got so immersed in the story. I felt very emotional about it myself. And though when I've been writing for about 3 years, and when I read out, I just read it out. So being able to bring it to life the way I did there was wonderful for me. Thank you.
And half the energy for that contract was the fact that you've got 6, 7 eager, earnest listeners who you knew.
Yes.
You know me a bit now.
Yeah.
And so that was an excellent example of allowing a very, very strong thread of communication. You were full of subtle micro timings early on as well. And interesting that you talked about this business of getting carried away with what you were doing, which was totally positive. At the beginning, and I thought this might have been negative, but in the end, I don't think it was negative at all, because it just gave a greater gradient of contrast. In the beginning, you were very obviously reading from a script. It's okay, it's fine. But later on, it was almost as if you were not on the script at all. You were remembering what you'd written and not even having to check on the script. And I don't know, and I don't particularly want to know, but I'll be very impressed either way, whether in fact some of that was not exactly what you had written down in front of you. That would be totally positive.
I'm not going to tell you.
No, okay, fine. That's a very good performance reaction. But either way, there would be a plus in that. And you certainly weren't trapped. You didn't trip up at all, even if you were improvising from time to time. And perhaps the thing I want to leave in your minds most of all is the subtle micro timing of the silences around repeating, and then a different kind of silence, because even more peremptory. Shut up. Shut up. Can't remember exactly the pacing of the 2 shut ups, but they weren't identical. And they were very powerful for being slightly different. So that was I thought this was how it was going to be, actually. This is a fantastic object lesson in the weakness of our sung historical repertoire and the strengths of free speech. But there are so many other things about singing that we tend not to focus on the weaknesses, we focus on the strengths. But certainly people from other music cultures of the world sometimes do find the rhythmic aspect of Western art music a bit pedestrian. But we probably don't, because we've grown up with it, and there are so many other things that gain our complete attention. Thanks, Helen, that was great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.